Mother Angelica, founder of the Eternal Word television network, has shared her struggles, her frustrations, her joys, and her inspirations for over 20 years. Her life seems to be an open book, but how well do you know her? Join us today with Raymond Arroyo, who has written a new biography on Mother Angelica's life, one of the most powerful women in the church today. I'm Father Michael Scanlan, Chancellor of Franciscan University, and you're watching Franciscan University Presents. Stay with us. Talking about that most remarkable woman and non-powerful woman in the Catholic Church, Mother Angelica. And we have with us, of course, our regular panelists, Dr. Regis Martin, Professor of Systematic Theology, and Dr. Scott Hahn, Professor of Scriptural or Biblical Theology. And our main guest, happily, is Raymond Arroyo, who is the creator and host of the international news magazine The World Over, which I watch weekly, and also has overseen the whole development of the news aspect on EWTN over the years. He's a graduate of New York University's Tisch School of Arts, and most importantly, received an honorary degree and gave us a rousing commencement address in May of 2005 here at Franciscan University.
But you still won't refer to me as doctor. I came all this way.
You are right, doctor. I did fail, yes, I'll repent. But we're talking about you're taking on the enormous project that is more and more intriguing as people read it further. The story, Mother Angelica, the remarkable story of a nun, her nerve, and her network of miracles, published by Doubleday, September 2005, and already a New York Times bestseller. You do have a wife, Rebecca, and 3 children, and you did come from New Orleans, and we're going to just jump right into this whole process. Why did you decide, and was it your initiative, how did this task get going, that you would really tell the inside story of Mother Angelica?
You know, working near Mother for all of the years, I'd known her 5 years before I approached her about this project. And over dinner or in passing or after a live show, she would tell me little bits and pieces about her childhood, about growing up. Some of these things, most of them, I hadn't heard or seen anywhere. And there was an earlier biography of her written in the early 80s. I would call it now sort of a pious biography of Mother Angelica.
Yes, it didn't have the inside story
authorized. A much authorized biography, super authorized. I approached Mother in 1999 after a retreat. I was questioning what I should do next, and after prayer, I had this sensation and feeling that maybe I should take on the task of writing a definitive account of her life because of the icon she had become in the church and the force she was in the church. So I approached her the next week, and I said, look, I think I can write a definitive biography. I think it'll take me 2 years. But I need your assistance on this, but I don't want it to be an authorized biography. And she said, well, why not?
Oh, yeah.
I said, because I need editorial control and the freedom to investigate this story. She went, uh-huh. She prayed about it a few days and came back, and she said, all right, let's start and see what happens. And we launched in, typical Angelica answer. We launched in and every Saturday, starting in 1999, we would meet between 10 o'clock in the morning and 7 at night, and we would move chronologically through her life. During the week, I'd run off to Canton and Cleveland and Mobile, Alabama and Birmingham and interview folks and pull first-hand documents and come back with a new list of questions when the week was over. And this went on for 3 years.
So you had the access, all that you needed with Mother?
Once she committed to the project and realized that this wasn't going to be a whitewash, she kind of threw herself into it and gave me much more than I would have given a biographer coming in, certainly someone who knew me. I mean, you know, as I say in the book, you want a novice, you want an outsider to do your life story. You don't want somebody with too many inroads and too much knowledge. I knew so much, and many of the people in her life. She gave me diaries, letters, medical records, anything I wanted, education records, her mother's medical history, the divorce decrees of her parents.
And everything.
She gave me permission to
the
go
whole
into
family, everything about it. So you had full access.
Really unfettered access. And I have to say, also to Mother's credit, she did not see this book until it was in the form you see it on that tape.
Oh my!
I handed it to her on September 6th, and that was it.
Well, you know, even more amazing is the providential timing, the divine hand in terms of health, because you got her in those 3 years where she was remarkably lucid before the strokes, really, you know, and you got at the right time.
She was ready to tell the story. She was 70, you know, she was in her late 70s. Mother had been very reluctant to go back, and, you know, she was never a woman of the past. She was always looking forward. So I guess I hit her at the right time, and at the end of the 3 years, a remarkable thing, really. We started in 1999. On November 28th, 2001, I went to her and I said, look, Mother, we've done this now for 3 years, but we've reached the present. You know, we've moved chronologically through your life. We're up to date. I want to spend the next 3 or 4 hours talking about the future of the order, the future of the church, your future. And she said, oh, good, no more dates. I said, no more weekend dates. And your schedule is free on Saturdays. And we did a live show together the next week. We pre-recorded a Christmas special, and she went into her convent for her Advent retreat. And 3 weeks later, she was felled by this debilitating stroke. It sealed her speech. It blocked her memory. Had we not moved in that moment, had we not trusted divine providence and our own inspirations that were coming to us from God, I think, we would have lost a good half of this story.
Well, and lost for sure, or confused, because nobody, even writing a movie script, would create the background that she had for someone to become a contemplative nun and a broadcaster. I mean, the shock of what she went through in Canton, Ohio, growing up with, and by far, not the elite district.
Oh, no. That's putting it mildly, the red light district, really.
Yeah, what in those early years might have given any clue that she could come to it?
Before we dust off the archives and revisit her childhood, I'm a little bit puzzled about the present moment. You mentioned that she didn't see anything until the book was published.
No, she
and
didn't
then you
see it.
presented it to her. But
September
3
6th.
weeks after the final interview, she is struck down by this terrible illness, which robs her of speech and memory. So I presume she can't read the book.
No, she's listened to it on audio tape, but she can read. It's just very taxing for her to read.
I
no.
see.
She is lucid. I mean, she understands everything.
She's not entirely
Oh,
incapacitated.
no. The only after effects of the stroke are, it's aphasia. She knows exactly what she wants to say. You can see her reacting and making great facial expressions.
But when it comes out, she's so frustrated because it's not what she meant to say, you know.
Well, it's got to be maddening.
Well, for a communicator, it is a great deep cross, and we get into some of that at the end, you know, the end of the book.
And we'll even get back to it at the end, Regis, but we'll pick up right now, because to me the most fascinating part is to understand what she came out of, in her background. And what a word of hope that could be to anybody who believes, oh, gee, I can't do this, I can't do that because I didn't have a good family, or I didn't grow up in a good way, or didn't have the education, or didn't have the friends. Tell us just, wherever you want to start.
People have asked me, why did you write this book? Why did you feel you had to write this book? And looking at it and thinking about it, meeting these magnificent people at the book signings from all walks of life, Catholic, non-Catholic, Jews, atheists, you name it, they come to these book signings. They're drawn to this woman. And I really wrote it for people who have been told, you can't, you're not smart enough, you don't have the background, you shouldn't go down this path. Who are you to do this thing you feel called to? Mother Angelica is a glowing, glistening testament that you should follow those inspirations, that God does have a huge plan for your life if you have the faith, the radical faith, to follow him in that present moment. And that was the testament of the woman. Her appeal, the reason I'm getting everyone from maids to truck drivers to CEOs to captains of industry coming to these book signings and rallying around the book. This woman came from the street. She speaks the language of the common man. And she also understood the heartache and the terror of coming from a dysfunctional family and living in an impoverished environment. She brings all of that with her. So when she looked into that camera and spoke to people for 20 years, spoke to their hurting, gave them practical spiritual advice when they were contemplating suicide, she understood. She was speaking from an authentic place. She had that authenticity that I think the beloved John Paul had. She could connect with people. That is a rare gift to the church, and we don't have many in leadership in the church with that kind of background. And when she spoke, people felt she was speaking just to them, and she was.
You know, the thing that I like about the book, not just the stories that fill up the middle section, but the bookends, the background in her childhood, where you really unearth the things that make us understand her much better and make us appreciate God's grace much more. But the other bookend is the remarkable set of graces that came to her at the very end of the 90s, at the end of the millennium, where you have that healing, you know, and the dancing that comes with it, you know, and then also this definitive moment where the network itself is defined in canonical terms in a very advantageous way, you know. Those sorts of things just make it, you make it, it's such a divine work. I mean, it's such human clay that God is working with, but it gives us great hope. She has no fear of man. But she has a great fear of God.
And that came from the street. That came from that background that you talked about. I mean, this is a girl abandoned at 5 by her father, left in the care of what we discovered was a deeply, deeply mentally disturbed woman. Her mother was suicidal, a manic depressant, I believe. The earlier biography depicted her as sort of a sweet Cinderella, you know, of a mother taking her daughter, little Rita, around and, oh, just suffering. She was a tough cookie. And later becomes a nun in Mother's monastery.
Amazing.
We'll hold that till later, but
I won't
wow.
talk about that, but
Go ahead.
But you know, this background and living, you know, among prostitutes and mafiosos, poor disadvantaged blacks and Italian immigrants, she had a heart for people. She was in touch with their suffering and their angst and their want. She knew they weren't bad people. They were caught in bad circumstances that led to ill choices. And Mother Angelica, through her whole public ministry, to my eye, was engaged in reaching out to the wounded and the hurting. That was her primary audience. Those were her people. That was who she was.
But she was also in the center of things. I mean, you have the picture of her as the majorette, leading things, being the main cheerleader at a football game in high school. This is extraordinary. You know, this very slender, tall lady, Rita herself, in those moments. It's extraordinary. Is there anything other than courage to indicate in her, all the way up through her high school years, that she'd ever end up where she did?
No, there isn't. This woman is not, they were not churchgoers, the family. They were nominal Catholics at best, Easter and Christmas Catholics sometime. Her religious education constituted her grandfather passing a church and tipping his hat. I mean, you know, and she said, well, why'd you do that, Grandpa? And he said, you know, that's for Our Lady and our Lord. Keep walking. You know, that was it. I mean, that was the extent of the religious education. The turning point is that healing, the healing later. This was a girl who, because of the horrible circumstances in her mother's situation, she was developing stomach abnormalities from nerves, I think, and primarily the doctors seem to think as well. And she got to a point where she suffered a physical problem. It was a dropped stomach where the organ was pinched at the top, so food wasn't reaching her stomach. She became very ill, was losing weight, and her mother takes her to a mystic in Canton, Ohio, that would change her life.
Yeah, you have a photograph of that mystic, don't you, in the book, covered with blood?
I've heard of her over the years, very much so, though it's always been shadowy for me, you know. I've heard of this unusual woman, Rhoda Wise, who suffered all the sufferings of Christ, and I think her whole situation was so big that church officials didn't
know what to do.
You got a woman who's bleeding every Friday from her hands and her feet and her head. Hundreds are lining up outside her house. She claims to see Jesus and Saint Therese, and there's this bright light that shines in her room at certain times when she claims Jesus is there. I mean, there were certainly mystical phenomena around this woman that probably need more investigation, but to the point of this story, Rita Rizzo, Mother Angelica, is suffering the stomach abnormality. Her mother finds out from a friend of hers who's a maid for Rhoda Wise about Rhoda. They take young Rita to see her in 1943. Rhoda Wise doesn't touch Rita. She gives her a prayer card, a Saint Therese novena, and says, pray for a healing. Rita does so. She is healed and can eat again and hold food down and feels for the first time she has a God in heaven, a Father in heaven who cares for her uniquely. And this is the moment that really turns her whole life around.
I see.
Within a year, she's in the cloister. And
Yeah, that's what really fascinates me, because you would imagine that a woman like her would have grown up in this pious household, cocooned in a kind of devotion. But none of that is the case.
No.
It's indistinguishable from the world that she knew.
Right.
Gritty, feisty, squalid,
Yeah.
and yet she rises above that through an illness,
Yeah.
through this devastating physical disorder.
And this is the theme that would run through the life, the redemptive power of suffering.
Yeah.
Rhoda Wise would teach young Rita that. She would also teach Rita what many of your fellow college professors and others haven't quite learned yet. Jesus is not a concept. He's not an idea or a theory. He's not something confined to our minds. He's a living God moving through his people, moving through the earth. And she saw that in a vivid, dramatic way in the person of Rhoda Wise. Physically, she watched the blood come out. She would stand there as hundreds processed by to touch her feet when they bled on Friday. I mean, this is a kind of extraordinary, almost bizarre occurrence. But it would leave a brand and a mark on Mother Angelica. She would never forget. And she would bring that truth and try to bring that reality of Jesus to millions later in her life.
Well, of course, when we come back, we're gonna take right there how this woman then moved to the cloister in EWTN and just had a simplicity of following inspiration which boggles the mind. Stay with us.
At the heart of the church, ex corde ecclesiae. That is where the Holy Father is calling Catholic universities to be. And that is where you'll always find Franciscan University of Steubenville. The church's lifeblood flows through our campus, from the classrooms to the playing fields and in our residence halls. This immersion in faith and reason equips our students to be the next generation of Catholic leaders. Its foundation is here, at the heart of the church.
Okay, we're in the middle of it with Raymond Arroyo talking about Mother Angelica growing up in a dysfunctional family in Canton, Ohio, with all the stuff that goes on in the streets, and then the miraculous healing because this woman mystic hands her a card and tells her to pray to St. Teresa. How do we get from there to founding a worldwide network and being abbess of a contemplative community? Let's see our best way. Is there a shortcut, or?
I don't know. Mother Angelica told me, as we talked about this, she didn't plan anything, Father. Everything here was divine providence. The woman felt inspired, and she would ride those inspirations out to their natural conclusion, pushing like a bulldozer. Father Benedict Rochelle often says, Mother Teresa and Mother Angelica are like bulldozers in a marshmallow forest. And he's right. They are. They both kind of, and I having known both of them, they could really be. When they felt God was calling them, they would press forward no matter the obstacles. Mother was like that. A friend of mine, Ron Hansen, the great novelist, said when he read this, he saw something of the nativity here. A simple woman coming from a backwater place everyone ignored, who rose up to do this amazing thing. And it didn't happen quickly. And I wanted to put the stumbling blocks and the failings and the breakdowns and the hardships in the story, because that's what most of us have. We don't have flashes of insight. God doesn't talk directly to me. All I get is static when I call. But Mother Angelica had this direct line in time through her great union with God. I think what you see, the story really begins in the monastery. She's in about the 8th or 9th year of her contemplative life, or maybe 10 years, and she's mopping a floor.
And she actually joins and sends a letter to her mother telling her she's already joined.
Yeah, she didn't inform her mother.
She didn't inform family.
She couldn't.
Go ahead.
She couldn't. Yeah.
Everything was inspiration now.
Yeah, no. She went
Okay.
and visited, but she was also obedient to her spiritual director, who felt it would be her mother wouldn't be able to handle it.
Yeah.
He told her, go and write her a letter, and he also redirected her to the contemplative life rather than an active life.
Yeah,
Partly, I think, in fear that the mother would barge in and drag her out.
Yeah, kidnap her.
Yeah. So it was to protect Rita, and it was also to give. He felt she was genuinely a contemplative. About 10 years into her contemplative life, she's mopping a floor in the Canton Monastery. She slips and injures her spine, and surgery is required. She had an extra vertebra. And the surgeon comes in and says, there's a 50-50 chance you won't walk again. And she makes a deal with God. She says, if you allow me to walk, I'll build you a monastery to your glory in the South. Now, it's been a mystery for decades. Why the South? She lives in Canton, Ohio.
Right.
Why the South? So I started putting these things together, and the first clue was
maybe
in
she
the...
meant Steubenville. That was south.
That was south of Canton.
Okay,
No,
go ahead.
But I think she meant deep south.
Okay.
And she, the first thread I found here was her monastery was actually quite progressive in this sense. They were hosting something called interracial days in the early 50s, where they were bringing in black Catholics from Cleveland, Ohio, to celebrate Mass with white Catholics on the lawn at Santa Clara Monastery. Okay,
Right.
so they were very attuned to the racial situation, and Mother, having come from a mixed neighborhood, understood the plight of poor immigrants and Italians and blacks. So she was focused on the difficulty, and her intention was to start a contemplative house in the South to pray for the racial injustices.
Yeah, to pray, but also even to invite.
Oh, yeah,
right?
she wanted to create a black cloister.
Right.
Have black religious come and pray for their brothers and sisters in the community. So that is why she said, I'll build you a monastery in the South. She had intended to do this 7 years prior, I found from some of the nuns who she had discussed this with in the garden or in the kitchen. And doing
But you know,
duties.
it's not easy to just, if you're in a cloister, say, now I'll go and build one somewhere else.
Oh, no.
How did she get the...
Well, that's
community
what
to support
intrigues me
that.
about her and the way that you account for it in the book. Her persona seems not the least bit contemplative. You describe her as the world's most outspoken contemplative,
Yes.
which, you know, may strike people as sort of oxymoronic. How can you be both? How do you reconcile
There
those
is
two
this,
things?
I think Mother Angelica is, she didn't leave her personality at the cloister door when she walked in.
Yeah.
She took it with her.
Yeah.
And her nuns, I have to tell you, they have this same spunk and this energy and this
see.
joy and this vibrancy that she had. They are not glum sisters. And I think if you look at the vibrant orders, even contemplative ones today, they have this joy and this fight in them that is holy and contemplative, yet they bring their personality and their humanity to bear. She balanced both of those things out, I think, and she was actually obviously a born leader. She drew the sisters to her and moved everything down to Birmingham. and started
No,
building.
just help us just a little bit there.
Yeah.
That fast move. you
Yeah,
know,
yeah, that's
I
a big
mean,
move.
Like, how many did she take with her? How many did she leave behind? And was there real resistance anyway?
Oh
to
yeah,
this?
there was a challenge in the monastery. There was another nun who wanted to start her own order, and the two of them were vying. And again, they sent the way the abbess resolved it was to send a letter to each respective bishop, one in the South, one in St. Cloud, Minnesota, at the same time. They mailed it in the mailbox at the same time. She said, whoever writes back first with an affirmative answer wins. And Mother Angelica's bishop wrote back first. Bishop Tulin, Archbishop Tulin down in Mobile, Alabama, said, you know, come on down and you can establish a house here. And that was the beginning. Then she made fishing lures to raise money for the enterprise in
How
Canton, Ohio.
ingenious.
Oh yeah, this is Angelica, the entrepreneur.
You
Which you
wonder.
can trace back to the childhood.
Yeah. I mean, this irrepressible personality, you wonder if it hadn't been baptized by grace, what would she have? I mean, she might have become a kind of Mussolini, you know, just impossible
I'm
to
glad
live
you said
with.
that, and I didn't. But you're going to have to answer for that. But she said someone once visited Mother Angelica when she was, you know, in the grill behind the parlor there, and they said, "Mother, I'm so glad you're behind these bars because I fear you could have been behind others had you not." You know, and you know, she was a feisty, always a feisty woman with enormous vision and tenacity. When she, again, if she felt God was calling her to it, there had to be another way, and she always found another way.
And
As unlikely as it was to get this monastery established down there in the Deep South, I found the unlikeliest part of the story what happens next when eventually this media emerges. I mean, it was the unlikeliest scenario you could possibly paint.
Well, and again, this is part of that evolution that Father was alluding to earlier. And I'll give you the Reader's Digest. We don't have time to get into every movement here, but
they'll read the book.
Yeah, I hope they'll read the book.
Okay.
In 1960, she goes down to build the monastery, and the Archbishop said, look, they don't know who you are, honey. They've never seen a nun down here. You're going to have to go around and explain yourself to the community. So he sends her, he says, while you're building the monastery, I'll give you permission to go speak. So she spoke to Elks Lodges and sewing circles and Jewish temples. Anybody would listen. There were a lot of Sicilians down there. She spoke to them. And it was while speaking to a group of Episcopalian ladies at St. Luke's down there in Birmingham. They wanted her to lead a Bible study for them, which she did out of her cloister, in the parlor of the cloister. This goes on for 5 years. The Bible study was so dynamic, people wanted her to write. And she wrote these little mini books, 57 of them in the chapel, as they were dictated to her by God. She then, those are spread all over the country. People are inviting her to charismatic conferences. She starts speaking at them. I know you were at her side at many of those.
Yeah, well, I remember the booklets before she ever got on TV.
The mini books,
yeah. I was reading these things. They said, you ought to meet this nun, you know. And we invited her here to speak in different places.
And she was everywhere. She was so dynamic, people wanted her on television, and a group from Michigan raised money. And they underwrote the production of a little at-home television Bible study. And it was her sitting in a rocking chair with a papier-mâché fireplace behind her and a little candelabra, and she would give her teachings. They were crude at first, but they had that spark, they had that earthiness and the humor. And that she would grow in time and perfect.
But she connected immediately. With an audience.
Immediately with an audience. The television thing took her a little longer because there was no audience there.
Right.
And they're a little stiff at the beginning, I have to tell you.
She would always identify with Peter in those days.
Oh, yeah.
She would always tell you how Peter felt and how exasperated and frustrated he got and how he got down to the bottom of things. And she made Peter live. I mean, you could.
Well, she had
walk
something
with
of his
him on that.
impetuosity.
She could relate to him very, very well.
Yeah, she could, and she understood, and she took away the mythology that we sometimes layer on and on top of the Scripture. She made it alive and personal and
you can
human.
picture her walking on that lake towards Christ.
She would reenact it in those days.
I mean, she has this wonderful line that you quote, we've got to be willing to do the ridiculous if God is going to do the miraculous. And what's more ridiculous than walking on water?
Yeah, or a nun starting a television empire, which she would in the garage of the monastery.
And just so we don't leave the mother too far out, she's gotten this letter. And
May Rizzo,
and it was disturbing. And but how long did it take?
It took years for May Rizzo, her mother, to relax and realize this was an authentic calling and to let her daughter go. This was her emotional crutch for her whole life.
Sure.
May Rizzo needed little Rita to keep going on. She relied on her for emotional support. She was the dynamo that held the family together. She was really the fundraiser for the household, too. When May Rizzo would have her nervous breakdowns, Rita would be working part-time and going to school.
She had the business work.
Oh, yeah.
Which later on pays off.
Yeah, yeah.
So she grew up in a hurry.
She grew up in a hurry. She was a mother by 7 years old. She was driving a car by 11 and making deliveries for her mother's dry cleaning business. Right.
And
So she was a worker. Work was not anathema to this girl. Right. And people have told me when she was in Birmingham, she was out there with the mallet breaking up rocks. She was cleaning things. She was moving statues. She was building cabinets. The woman was a builder and a doer from the beginning. So of course God would use this very simple instrument to create this empire. And it is today the largest religious media empire on the planet. And she is the first woman in the history of broadcast to found a non-for-profit cable network and remain CEO for 20 years. That is a singular accomplishment in television history.
The authentic Catholic feminist.
There you go. The authentic Catholic feminist, indeed.
And the mother, when does the mother follow?
In 1964 or 5, the mother comes down. May Rizzo comes down after she retires from the Canton Waterworks, a job Rita got for her. She retires and comes down to Birmingham and eventually joins the order, becoming Sister Mary David, a nun who never put down her slingshot, and caused Mother great. It was a tough. It was a tough fit. You can imagine being superior to your own mother. As Mother Angelica often said, "I became my own grandmother." It was not always an easy fit. May Rizzo would break her hip. And she would get a replacement that never quite fit. She was in terrible pain. She refused to take any painkillers and was an absolute holy terror in that house.
Oh, I see.
But that too would perfect Mother Angelica in ways she couldn't
Gosh,
have
it's
imagined.
just astounding. I mean, despite all these shortcomings, this crazy mother who's tormenting her practically right to the edge of the grave, she raises up this blooming empire.
Yeah.
I mean, Bishop Foley says that we've got to compare her legacy to the founding of the parochial school system.
Oh my.
And the evangelization in this country was begun
The new
by Mother
evangelization.
Angelica.
And I think that's true in many.
It's an extraordinary, just to emphasize, the new evangelization which the Pope wanted with new use of media, new approaches to the message, new fervor, and new results was just the thing that was happening through this television.
And they start their work at almost the same time. In October of 1978, Mother Angelica begins this push into television to start to build this network, and she would start officially begin it in 1981, but she started in 1978 doing television. In that same October, he's elected, John Paul is elected Pope. Their works almost begin at the same moment. It is, and you know, again, this is a simple woman who never saw television until the 1960s. Right. She didn't even know television, which was part of her appeal. She would sneeze, she would cough, she would gag, she would do everything on air, let it all hang out. You know, and you know, someone coming from you know, I came from an acting background where everything is rehearsed and planned and staged, and Mother Angelica taught me very quickly. Relax.
Yeah, there's no
This is for your brothers and sisters.
Right.
You're sharing, brother.
Right.
And you know, that was kind of her television approach.
And not only her physical disabilities, but if we could put it this way, her moral failings. I mean, her irascibility, everything is showcased. I mean, she's completely unbuttoned, but in a way that endears her to people because we're struggling with the same things.
Oh, yeah, and you saw Mother would explode in anger at moments, and she could be suspicious, but she did that. I think she showed that side of herself, I think, so that people would realize, I'm like you. Just because I've got a habit, just because I pray 4 hours a day, doesn't mean I'm walking with the angels here,
she
boys
made
and
it.
girls. And she
had a big impact in changing me, realizing, hey, you're talking to a woman cooking in the kitchen and a guy trying to repair the front door.
That's right.
And they're just looking back and forth between the TV, and you're talking to what they're feeling and thinking. And that would change my whole idea of television.
And the beauty of this, the beauty of the book, that I've been the great recipient of this, you know, totally unearned. New people have come to her because they see the face in a bookstore and they're kind of fascinated by this nun. People who've never watched her on television. And then I go to these book signings, and at the end of the line, here's a truck driver and a maid from the local, you know, Motel 6, and they're in line with their books. And one guy said, you know, I listen to her on the radio when I'm moving freight cross country. I got satellite radio to listen to her. And the maid says, I bring my little FM radio with me, and I use it as I clean rooms, and it's the light of my life. These are her people. And you know, there are times where I sit there weeping, you know, all over the books, because this is who she came for. This is who she was and is.
Well, when we come back, we're going to, what did she do with all this? And what was the message? And where's the results? Where is it in the church today? Stay with us. You're watching Franciscan University Presents, but you can experience a greater fullness of this message. Our conferences zero right in on strong catechetics that teach you to deepen your faith and to be equipped to go out into the marketplace and stand for the Lord Jesus Christ and His church.
Franciscan University Summer Conferences, 800-437-8368, franciscanconferences.com.
We're talking about the remarkable story of Mother Angelica with the author Raymond Arroyo, who's written this book on her life and has unearthed for us all sorts of aspects of this nun's background, growing up as a little girl in Canton, Ohio, and seemingly some of the worst circumstances, but emerging as such a powerful leader. We're here at Franciscan University, surrounded by our students, and here just reliving the life of Mother Angelica, and I think, Raymond, we're to the point of Vatican II. In other words, Mother joined something, and at least it seems in the early stages was trying to live it as established, went through the regular formation of the convent, the whole Poor Clare tradition.
Very austere, religious training,
cloister training. Vatican II comes, and she becomes the abbess down in Alabama, and what happens?
Well, my friend George Weigel said, in some ways, the woman lived the post-Vatican II experience. It's a microcosm of the history of the church. She embodies it. She goes through all the phases, and the first phase here is she comes out of a very, what she described as a rigid, formal training that she felt was restricting something she called the family spirit of the cloister that should reign. So when Vatican II hit, before Vatican II, actually, Mother Angelica is talking about ripping the grill out of the cloister and abbreviating the veils. And really, I mean, if you read the writings that haven't been seen for 40 years that I dug up, she is quite progressive. Yeah. You know, today we'd probably describe her as a liberal. She was right on the cutting edge of that. She quickly realizes, as the council kicks into high swing and the spirit of the Vatican Council is imbibed by many, that the letter of Vatican II is being ignored, and starts backtracking real fast. She puts the grill back up, she puts the turn back in. She's concerned about, you know, the story she tells is, you know, she was all for the abbreviated habits, and one day she's recreating and invites some active order nuns over to recreate with the sisters, and in walks a pair of nuns who had taken scissors to their habits and came in with pumps and no veil. Yeah, she said, "What is this? What's happening?" You know, so she quickly retreats and finds some balance.
I do want to say how friendly it was. I used to say Mass or do programs down there regularly, and at the end of my program, she'd always say, "Oh, come on." And I joined the nuns, and, you know, we'd eat and chat and all these things. Everything was family.
A very
and I was
open
part
kind
of the
cloister.
family. It was very relaxed. It was very, very friendly. And indeed, it was uplifting. It wasn't like they'd done some breakaway.
Oh, no.
They were really spiritually oriented and family oriented. But then the extremes started to come across.
Well, she was finding that balance. She was trying to find that balance that I think the council was looking for, where the expression of the personality could come through, but that you wouldn't crush the spirit of the person, but that a family spirit could predominate. And that was truly her mission. And in time, she has found that. But she became very charismatic for a period, which led to her scripture study. She'd never read the scriptures as a girl. She had the Bible.
I heard her teach in different places on scriptures, you know what I mean? And she made them live more than
no, she was on fire, and there's nothing. You look at Mother Angelica and you say it can only be the Holy Spirit moving through this woman, because it was a very brief time. She finds the scriptures coming out of a charismatic experience in the late 70s, and by 3 or 4 years later, she's out teaching on it. I mean, you know, now she'd read them in the cloister, and she'd read a lot of spirituality in the cloister, so that was there. But the fullness of it would overflow into the 70s and the 80s, and then she moves out of the charismatic phase into, I always maintain that Mother remained in prayer a charismatic. I think she always had that.
In her personal
prayer life, she was
there
always.
was some of the things she saw going on that she wasn't going to connect with.
Right, and so what she did was then she moved into a more Eucharistic and sacramental focus and a Marian focus. And then she realized some of the traditions and the devotions of that she was introduced to as a girl in Cleveland might not have been such a bad thing. And she revived some of those. But she never lost the family spirit and that openness and that spunk. And now in her community, you see the beautiful marriage of the dynamic orthodoxy.
It's the spirit of Vatican II, which I think she absorbed quite rightly, but always anchored to the letter of the council.
You know, she embodies so much of what immigrant Catholics had been, too, before the council, and how susceptible they were to the cultural forces that came unglued after the council, and yet the Holy Spirit guides her in a way in the story that shows the cumulative nature of her development. She never leaves anything behind, you know. She takes it to the next level, you know.
Including her failings and her weaknesses, and that's what I love too. Those weaknesses, you know, many of us try to get rid of everything. Mother Angelica's whole message was, perfection is not necessary for sanctity. You can have those failings. God will use those failings if you present them to him and let him help you work through them. And she presented every weakness, her crippledness, her diabetes, her asthma. She put all of that on the altar to God, and he used it and perfected it,
And she had
to his glory.
the miracle, the Rosary miracle and her dancing. I saw that show.
Now
where
this
she
sounds
was-
like a production of King and I. Let's go
I
back a
know.
little bit and explain this. Yeah, this is 1997. She's going through a rough time personally, terrible physical woes. And for those who don't know, Mother was essentially crippled. She walked with crutches. After that deal she made with before the spinal surgery, she told God, I'll build you a monastery if you help me walk again. And she walked with crutches and a brace that ran from her neck down one leg, leading her to comment later, when you make a deal with God, be very specific. Because
She left him a couple of loopholes.
that's right. The loopholes always get you. So she would walk, but it was with great difficulty. In the midst of this, and in a terrible time where she was struggling within the church, outside the church, a mystic comes to her, again, a mystic, an Italian one named Paula Albertini.
Yes, right.
Strange person, a little peculiar. And Mother didn't want to see her. And she's convinced to see her, and she does after the live show, and she said, look, I'll pray a rosary with you. So they start praying the rosary, and in the middle of the third decade, she feels this warmth in her legs and takes the braces off. And the nuns are very worried because they've seen what happens when they took the braces off previously. When they're putting her to bed or something, her feet would just mash to the side and she'd fall over. They'd have to hold her up. She took the braces off and she walked across the room. And then she walked back. And then for the first time in 40 years, she started moving side to side, which she could never do. And she walks again without assistance. And this would go on. And it was a
And
healing.
we did this little dance thing that
Oh, yeah,
she
well-
did. I watched that show where she came
well,
out
she
to-
grabbed everybody she could. The security guards, some visiting guy.
It's all done on camera.
No, not initially. The next day they sort of recreated it on Jeff Caven's show. But it was the initial thing was she walked out of her office, which opened onto a kitchen, and there was a visiting guest there, and she said, "Hey!" and she's dancing around the hall with this guy, and it was this exhilarating kind of joyous moment, and she believed it was not for her, but for people to realize the power of God and that He never abandons us.
I think it was also another instance of providential timing from heaven, too, because at that point, there was so much misrepresentation. There was so much misinformation, disinformation going on about her, the network, and why she was doing what she was doing.
Yeah.
There were people standing by her, but there were a lot of people wondering, has she kind of gone off the rails? And when I read this book, I was so inspired by how much, you didn't sugarcoat it, but you pinpointed her prayer life as the wellspring for what she did, when she did it, how she did it. And I remember the first time I was ever on a show with her, I was really worried because we hadn't talked about anything.
She doesn't
It
talk.
wasn't just
Preparation.
unscripted. It felt chaotic. And so, moments before I'm walking on, Bill Staudemeyer leaned over and said, "Look into her eyes. You'll find the Spirit."
Wow.
And so I looked into her eyes, and it was the easiest show I'd ever done by far. And I've done it since, with her. But that sense, and after the show, I said, "How did that happen?" And she said, "If you love Jesus, you fear nothing."
Yep.
And I remember thinking, that's the truth. I forget that all the time, but if you love Jesus, you can fear nothing.
Everything from an inspiration. No
Yeah.
budget. No. Never a budget.
No
Never
script,
a master
no,
plan.
that's
I
it,
don't
yeah.
understand that. Even I'm considered very spontaneous and things. My
She
God,
takes
I
it
would-
to a new level.
Yeah, she raises it to a new level, doesn't she?
Yeah.
And the script thing, and then I'll talk about budget. I did so many live shows with her. We would walk out, and she'd say, "All right, let's pray." She'd pray. I said, "What are we talking about tonight?" "We'll find out in a minute." She'd start laughing, and then the camera would go on, and that was the show, and you just rolled with it. She had this wonderful buoyancy. It was all inspired, and she is the only person I know in the history of television, I think, who had a show for 20 years, no producer feeding you anything, no scripted questions, no script. She walked a tightrope act 2 times a week and did so for all of these years into her 70s.
Right. In striking contrast to that is Fulton Sheen,
Right.
I don't know if you remember the programs
sure.
from the 1950s, but
still
it would
airs after me
appear,
every night.
it would appear that
Yes,
he's
it's on, right.
extemporizing, but in fact, everything is carefully scripted.
Right, and
Every
reversed.
word, every
choreographed.
gesture, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Choreographed.
Yeah,
is the word,
yeah, no, she's a wholly
Mother
different
Angelica is this,
creature.
this free spirit.
Oh, yeah.
Nothing is programmed.
As the budgets prove, you know, Mother Angelica never, ever budgeted anything. Yeah, had she done that, she would never have taken the great risks, the leaps
see.
she took. And she
Right.
often said that, when you love Jesus, you're free. And she allowed that to reach into all parts of her life, including budgets, which most of us don't have the stomach for that. We love God, we want to be
Right.
faithful, but not that far. Mother, she was $1.5 million in debt. She had to buy a $2 million satellite dish, and she signed on the dotted line and just did it.
Right.
She would never budget, and to this day, there is no operating budget at EWTN. She absolutely forbade it. It is divine providence, she said. If God wants it, it will continue. When He doesn't, it won't.
I have a bunch of children who live that way, but I don't know that it's divinely inspired.
Well, that I can't explain.
But one more, her family spirit carries over so warmly. I mean, it brought me to tears, both how she cares for her mother, who's dying in the convent, and then Sister Raphael, who's becomes like a daughter to her. And she can you just, that family spirit that she had wasn't just the outgoing thing you saw on TV, but internally she was bonded. Say something.
Well, there's the beautiful thing in the story is, despite all of the chaos and the difficulty and the dysfunctional family, there is true reconciliation with Mother Angelica and her mother May. They don't get over all of their failings. They don't truly change, but there is a reconciliation and a peace that comes at the end. And Mother had this knack for doing that with her biological father, which you see in the book, as well as with her mother. And that spirit, that when she looked into that camera, she never called people friends or viewers. They were family, and they are family. It's a global family. And she said, it's in the book, told me in an interview, isn't it funny, the girl who never had a family leading a global one.
Right.
And there is some extraordinary divine humor in all of that, I think.
Very
Divine
hard.
pattern, too.
Okay, but and the call-ins, of course, she'd get so compassionate on one hand. On the other hand, if they were goofing around, really tell them what
Some of
to
my
do.
favorite shows is where she would look into the camera and she'd say, to some of you, I'm a mother. To some of you, I'm a grandmother. Well, tonight, I'm a father. And she'd lay down the law. Those were great nights. So she brought it all to bear. She brought everything a family brings to the table.
You give a big picture approach to her life so that you realize that every phase of her life, her own family, and then the cloister, and then after Vatican II, and then the network itself, there's always intense suffering.
Yeah.
And then a divine healing. And then she's free. And then more suffering. And then a divine healing. And that pattern is just, God's fingerprints in her life.
Yeah. Well, the weird thing, and the way I stumbled upon this, when I pulled all the medical records and saw the timing of these events, and then I put it up against the timeline of the network's growth, you realize every time the network took a meteoric leap, it was preceded by some terrible suffering or health crisis for this woman.
It's so unmistakable.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's
beautiful.
it's almost like
scary.
the B.B. King song. She paid the cost to be the boss. And you see that at every moment. It's you can't explain that. And as a biographer, my job was not to explain it. It was simply to present the evidence as I found it.
And we can't present all the evidence here.
Oh, I know it.
So when we come back, we're just going to do wrap-up points. What do you take away from this program about Mother Angelica, and really why you should read the book and find out the rest of the answers? So stay with us.
It's a great joy for me to encourage any of our listeners who are looking for a good Catholic college to look at Franciscan University. The reason why the Church is involved in higher education is to provide training and education within a Catholic frame of reference. The academic program at Franciscan University is excellent. They teach the Catholic faith, and they teach it with enthusiasm, intelligence, with excellent teachers, some of them renowned throughout the world. Think about us, Franciscan University.
We've been talking about the most extraordinary woman, Mother Angelica, and Raymond Arroyo's book on her life. There's so much there. There's so much that you could take away that I'm just going to ask our panelists to come up with, what do they take?
Well, this has been really a spirited exchange, I think, and I think that's consonant with the subject of your biography, Mother Angelica. You confessed straight away that your keenest regret was not getting a doctorate from this university. But I must say it hasn't inhibited you any in presenting this book. If you know anything about Scott and myself, you should realize how worthless those pieces of paper are. You have presented such an infectious perspective, I think, on this woman, and you are to be congratulated. I think of Oscar Wilde, who said, "Every great man and every great woman has disciples, but it's only Judas who writes their biography." But you, unlike most disciples, you remain, I think, a true disciple. You've told the truth, warts and all, but in a way that conveys, I think, a love and a gratitude for this woman. She's a force. She's a seminal force in the life of the church. She says that those who control the media, they control the church. And I think that's true. The media is the point of entry for most people's lives. They live in a kind of cyberspace, in a media bath. And she's running the show. And I'm just grateful that the character of her heart is so expansively apostolic, and her mind is so orthodox.
Okay, running the church is a bit loose expression, but we get the point that it gives the whole image and message of the church. Sure. Scott?
First, I want to say thanks for writing the book, and thanks for not whitewashing her, because that just made it easier to see, God's handiwork in her life. And I must say, I expected to be informed. I didn't expect to be transformed. I was more inspired by this read than I ever expected. And I think it was her love of Jesus and her fear of the Lord that really challenged me to stop being afraid of anything or anybody except the Almighty, and to fall in love with Jesus as this woman plainly did. Because there are dysfunctional elements in her own family upbringing that God used to prepare her to deal with the church, which is the family of God, but there are dysfunctional elements in the family of God as we experience it on earth in time, not in heaven. And I think it's a good reminder for me to realize that the problems and the crises and the sufferings of our lives aren't, the things that God has to allow in spite of his love, but these are the proofs of his love, a love that exceeds what we want, and yet it also enables her to accomplish things that exceed her own abilities, her own, limitations. And I found this book to be so inspiring. I am so glad to hear you say that truck drivers and motel maids and others are reading it too, because that's exactly what this is for.
Yeah,
I mean, those kinds of
it's
lives.
the reason I wanted to go with Doubleday. You go with a secular publisher, because as you are, I wanted it to reach everybody. And it's in Barnes & Noble, it's at Borders, it's on Amazon. It had to be everywhere, as she is. Mother Angelica never narrow-casted just to Catholic households. She went to everybody. She brought this message of hope to everybody. And what I extract from the book and take away from it, and I think someday she'll be known as the apostle of risk, I think, because she was willing to take higher and greater risks for God at every step of the way. Something she said in the 70s, I know you heard this before. She used to say, God is looking for dodos. Most people know it can't be done, so they don't do it. But a dodo doesn't know it can't be done, and I'm a dodo. So she had this great, warm, human approach to, infinitely complex spiritual and theological matters, and she could bring it down to a practical level. But that ability to take risk, that ability to allow herself to be used in ways that she obviously felt ill-prepared for, she didn't let it bother her. She kept moving forward, and that was Mother's great gift. And that's why it's, I think the book has caught on and captured the hearts of so many people.
It is extraordinary. Yes, yes, yes. As I read it, I thought of a life lived by inspiration. That when you get the inspiration, you know, God can muse you so much as you act on it. Now, Scripture does says, test and approve God's will, His good, holy, and perfect will, and maybe a little more testing is needed in our lives than was needed in Mother Angelica. But nevertheless, the heart of our life flowing from that kind of inspiration is extraordinary as she builds on
You know,
that.
she would test that will in the arena, though, where most of us test it and we fret and worry and do a plan and write it out. No, she would say, okay, you want me to do this? I'll go. And she did it. And I often asked her, and I asked Mother Teresa the same question, how do you know God's will? How do you know God's will?
Yes.
They both told me, in similar words, watch what happens.
Yeah.
Watch what happens. So, which means you have to go out there and throw it into the arena. You have to, as Mel Gibson said, let the fur fly. And Mother Angelica was willing to let the fur fly.
Yeah, Mother Teresa, when they asked her about her prayer life, she said, I just listen. Which is something.
Easier said than done.
Oh, it is. It takes a little development to there. Well, what do we have for you? We've got a great handout just for the asking, contacting us. You get the interview with Raymond Arroyo on Mother Angelica called God's Little Trojan Horse on Crutches. Trojan Horse on Crutches. And you can get a deeper sense of exactly how Mother, she used her suffering. She expected them there. There was even times when things she got started to get healthy, she'd get worried because she felt that God was really using those connected with a prayer life following inspiration. And the book itself, once again from Doubleday, Mother Angelica, the remarkable story of a nun, her nerve, and a network of miracles. I guarantee you'll find yourself in this book. You'll find your struggles. I guarantee you'll find a place in this book and say, that's just like I experienced it. They're just like who I am. And look at, she pressed through. And it was enough for her to have the inspiration, even when she didn't have the money, the resources, the friends, the support, whatever. She did these extraordinary things. So we ask you to learn from a great life and also stay connected with us. Distance education, come as a student, don't miss summer conferences. Mother didn't, we had her teacher summer conferences
The
here.
other doctorate.
The other doctorate. With this doctorate thing, he received the honorary doctorate in May of 2005, and Mother did back around 83, and gave a great talk about St. Peter there too. So anyhow, we've got a great inspiration here. Let's all learn from it and do more of God's work in God's Spirit according to what He sets before us, and not let our handicaps, not let our past that may have been very, very difficult hold us back from moving in God's inspiration. Till next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you, show His face to you and have mercy on you, turn His countenance to you and give you His peace. Amen.
To receive a free handout on today's topic or to purchase a videotape of this show, call toll-free 888-333-0381. That's 888-333-0381. Or you may call 740-283-6357. Or write to Franciscan University Presents, care of Television Productions, Franciscan University of Steubenville, 1235 University Boulevard, Steubenville, Ohio, 43952.